Okay.
All right, here we go. Hi. You know who I am, right? So I'll just do a little. How many folks have actually done live painting already? All right, so sort of half and half. That's cool.
Or just in general?
And just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I kind of feel like I don't want to be telling you all something that you already know. All I really know is my process, right? So I'll just sort of go through that. It's a real sort of basic, okay, my default setting of how I work in terms of abstraction and figurative stuff, you know, to sort of get to a level where I'm happy about it. But I would have to say, mostly, I've been doing this for over 10 years, like as a job. Like, this is what I do, this is how I make my money. You know, I would say in the early stages, it was doing other jobs. I was a house painter, a decorative painter, and stuff like that, silkscreener and stuff like that. But strictly doing it as like, okay, it's making the work and it's selling the work. That's like the other part of the job. So for me, it's very, very much about listening, honestly, and not having preconceived notions of what the painting is going to be. That helps me a lot. It really, really does come from me for whatever. There's not a better word for it, but the jazz tradition, even though some words I don't even like to use the word jazz these days, but in the improvisational zone, it helps me. I'm always improvising, and if I know that the band or the ensemble is doing that in some form also, that sort of makes me feel like we're working together. But even if I'm not, it really is about letting the painting be what it wants to be, without sort of getting into sort of a hokey spot. Since we're all artists, you are listening to the painting, right? Like in the process of me doing it, if the painting says, hey, it's time to do this, you go, okay, I will do that. And if the painting says it's time for this, and I go, no, I want to do this, the painting's going like, well, you know you're going to make a mistake. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to work off that mistake a little bit. It's kind of like when if you're improvising in a band and you want to give the other player something to work off of, or you're going to make fun of that person, or you're ribbing them about their girlfriend, something like that. It's kind of like that thing of like, okay, I'm going to give you something to work off of. So then we're talking about accidents, right? Every once in a while, I'll be doing something, and I'll be like, I just made a mistake. Okay, great. And part of the fun thing about doing it in a live setting is like, okay, now I'm being watched. What are you going to do with that mistake? And that happens in the studio by yourself. But what I like about, I took what I would do in the studio, I took it out. And then I got bit by that improvisational bug. And I started really feeling like I was like in the band, and I'm not a musician. So that sort of got me like that, oh man, I sort of figured something out. I sort of got this tingling spine thing. So that's what keeps me coming back to it. And it's also my way of say like to this quartet, which was a classical ensemble, me saying to them, I don't have to say to them, hey, I liked what you did, I liked what you did on that one piece and stuff like that. I just go, this is what you made me do. This is my reaction to your music, and that works with pop stars too. If I do a thing, I don't have to say like, hey man, I really like your album, or if I end up getting to meet Herb Alpert at a certain point, I won't be like, hey man, this and this and this. It'll be like, Herb, this is what you do to this person. As an artist to artist thing, this kind of works. So we'll go through materials real quick. That's kind of important. This is my wet, so the canvas thing is the wet version, which is, if they let me do it, which is get the tarps out. I usually do double tarps, vinyl, cloth on top. You never know when it's gonna be like, oh man, it's happened like once where I had like a gallon of paint or something like that. It wasn't even me, somebody was like, oh, what's this, and they stopped, or I had a painting on the floor and somebody stepped on it and I kept on walking. So it's always good to have something going on here. And since I have a habit of like being super protective, they let me go into places like the Museum of Contemporary Art, or a performance hall that has carpet, or some place that's been around for 100 years, because when they go, who's this? What's this guy coming? So that like they'll go through the email chain of who is this guy, who does he know, who knows this guy, be like, oh yeah, that guy, he's okay. You know, I've seen him do things, and he thinks he's all protective. So that's one of the things. But you know, I'll go through the process of actually doing it, but I do start off with, when I'm doing the wet, I use glaze, right? This is a sort of like dry clear. This glaze, actually, that I like so much, they discontinued now. It kills me when you find something as an artist that really works for you, like, oh, this is great, I'm set for the rest of my life. I'm like 50 something now, I'd be like, great, I can do this when I'm 90. They discontinue this kind of glaze, but there's other kinds. But I use that to put a layer down first, just to sort of get to let the acrylic act a little bit like oil, I guess. You know, it has instead of unless I want that, you know, like a dry brush thing going on, it lets it really go. So when I'm, you know, grooving with the music, I can really make long brush strokes with it. You know, the glaze lets me do that. And I tend nowadays to use screen printing inks. Also acrylic, but it can act like watercolor if I wanted to. It can act like a top note, like the stuff where you just like stick it on there, like a screen print, which like prints right on top and just stays there. It sort of has that nice, you know, when it goes with the glaze, it almost looks like watercolor sometimes. I've sort of tended to lean towards that. I also use acrylic paints itself. I mix my own paints. I kind of like to do that. It's sort of like a thing. But with silkscreen stuff, you know, you pretty much get what they give you. I don't really mix it, but I like to mix it on the canvas, if that makes any sense. But really, I'll go back to the listening part, man. For me, it's so much about that. It's so much about or else I could just do it in the studio and do my own thing. You know, it's really about what's going to be the story of this painting. And I sort of treat the gig like it's a story I'm trying to transcribe and interpret what the story is that the band wants to tell, even if they don't know that there's a story or not. And if there's not, I kind of make it up. So there's a lot of imagination going on. I mean, when I'm doing stuff with kids, you know, when you start talking about your imagination muscle, even though some people, my wife hates when I use them. The imagination muscle, that sounds terrible, but using that muscle in your head is like, it lets me do a lot of weird stuff, and it gives me the excuse to do abstract, right? So here's my shtick with that, is I pretend that the music is like a physical entity in the room, right? So we got a speaker back there, that's where the music's coming from. In my brain, if I let it do it, I don't actually see this stuff. It's not like I'm on psychotropics or something, but if there's ribbons of color and shapes and forms sort of coming, like the music is creating these things, and they're in the room, even in the corners of the room, they're surrounding the people and musicians, it gives me the opportunity to not just paint somebody playing the guitar, but I'm looking at this person playing the guitar, but in between me and the guitarist is all this fun nonsense, which is abstraction. So I say it's kind of like looking at something at the bottom of the pool. You know, you take something and you throw it at the bottom of the pool, you can see it there, but it's sort of wavering and shimmering and doing different things, and it gives me the excuse to be like, well, this guitarist it be a really long guitar, the head could be really big or really small, it could be repeated. You know, that's one of the fun things about, and you know this in figure drawing, when you're sort of drawing the person, if they're still, it's really helpful, right? They're just gonna stay there, like some of these great paintings back there. But for me, it's sort of capturing the figure in a repeated pose, and I sort of use my animation background in terms of like a key pose. Like if there's a saxophonist and they keep doing this, they keep coming back to this spot, you know, they're doing their thing. It's like, oh, there it is again. That's the shot that sort of is the character, you know. So I'll have that in my brain and sort of paint the other parts of the character, and when they get it, it's just like, oh, there it is, you know. And then often it's quick. Like when I'm working, it's only a 45-minute gig or something like that, so it's pretty quick. That sort of also is the like graffiti background of like, all right, I gotta do this real quick because I'm gonna get caught, sort of like that feeling. We can have that conversation about doing graffiti in New York City later on, but it's that urgency, right? And I think I take that with me too because, I don't know, life is so short, I don't know, and we also know that we never know what's gonna happen. Every painting I do, I think this could be the last one, man. Or it could be one of those things where you never know if they just start to shut everything down. Like, all right, live painting and jazz is done, forget it. Like, it's not in fashion anymore, it's not available. Or, in a real sense, the pandemic hit, right? And it was like, guess what? You can't go out and do what you used to do. It happened really fast. I thought the you can't go do that anymore was gonna happen when I was like an old man. And all of a sudden it was there, like with the pandemic. It was weird. It's kind of like, oh yeah, so like I was glad that I had spent, 9 years before that making lots of work because I could still do the other part of the job, which was selling it. But anyway, that sort of sense of urgency is also like, the music is only here for a limited amount of time, right? It's only there in the room for a little bit, even if the last note is played, it's kind of fading a little bit, so you get a couple seconds, but after that, it's gone, right? And that's when the painting's done. Anyway, I sort of do a lot of feeling thing. One thing I like to do like a fake frame thing is I do like blue tape stuff. Just do a little line there. It's one of those little things I've found. It's kind of nice. It's already pre-framed a little bit. Because I've also found that because of the music, I will just go to the edge. I'll go to the edge. I'll go right over there, and there won't be a lick of white space left. I'll just be like, the music's going. It's my job to keep going. And then my wife's like, why didn't we leave any white space? People like to breathe, like, do that, dude. So like, this sort of forces me a little bit to at least do something. But, all right, I guess demonstration time, right? And feel free to ask questions if you want. I really just want to, I also want to sponge off y'all too, if you don't mind. That's the artist tradition, right? Is to not steal, but borrow, right? Mm-hmm.
Imitation is the highest form of flattery.
Right. It's like, I can't help it. Sometimes I'm doing something and like, for lack of a better term, like, there's that damn Picasso again. I'm doing a Picasso. Or like, I'm straight up doing a Keith Haring move. But that's okay. Your influences are your influences, and you sort of bring your daily life to what you're doing, and also that's part of it.
Lou, how does the glaze extend drying time?
It does a little bit, but not much.
Okay.
Like, I don't count on it. There's an extender that you can add to glaze the paint that does. Right, to acrylic paint to make it do a little bit, but
I just never used that product. That's why I was curious. Like, I usually mix it with something.
It's like almost, instead of it being like, you can pretty much, even as wet as your brush would be, it would only do a couple things. It catches the granules of this, and then it's done. But with the glaze, just for the sake of information wet. This also comes from doing decorative painting techniques, where keeping the wet edge and working on a big wall where you're sort of doing distressed things and stuff like that. It's like, putting lots of glaze on this stuff and keeping it moving, knowing that when you get to a certain area, you gotta add more glaze so to keep it uniform. Sort of here's no glaze, that's fine, if that's what you want to do a certain thing. But the edges that have glaze, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's sort of and maybe it's my imagination, or maybe it's just like the viscous feel that it does. And it sort of creates an edge a little bit there for me and stuff like that. And it dries clear, which is kind of nice. And I also find if I'm sometimes I'll be working on a couple paintings at the same time, if it's like a festival or something like that. And so I'll be working on one area, go into another painting. By the time I come back to the first one, it's dry already, and it's ready for some more glaze on top. And this stuff will be dry enough that I can put glaze on top of that without moving it. Let me talk about layers. For me, it's a basic kind of like a 3-layer process, and it was really easy to show this on a iPad. I do iPad Pro Procreate drawing too, and it's like straight up. That's how layers work, right? Digital painting. So you're like, you're doing something on one layer, and then you want to do something else, you move to another layer. I tend to start with a layer of abstraction. Second layer is figurative, and then there's another layer of abstraction on top of that. When I say abstraction, that's kind of like the music, right? So I usually start off with like feeling out the room basically, and saying, listening to the painting, what do you want to be? So sometimes that will be, foundational stuff. You could call it a background painting. It also, for me, it also goes back to animation school, or animation. I worked in animation for a good 10 years in New York, turning kids' storybooks into short films, and it was the old school way. So it was background paintings, and then cells on top of that, and then other cells on top of that, which had to be, keen on what was going on. It was also like cut paper on the cell, which is cool too. And I love that because, you're sort of working on something. There'd be like, cells just stretched out across the room that were drawing, and you could see it happening in real time. But so for me, that's part of what this document is a. It's like, okay, what was it like to be there for that 45-minute set? Well, here's a snapshot of the thing, but not a snapshot in like how Harvey does it, but a snapshot like that's like you're seeing all the cells together at once and crunched. So that's why this could be termed a little busy, is because you're seeing the figures all layered on top of each other, and that's okay, because that for me is the interpretation of what it was like. Man was over here, there's a lot of people over here doing their thing, this person was scratching their nose, this person over there was on their phone. Lately I get a lot of those where someone's just like on their phone. It's like, okay, you're in the shot. Or music stands are in there. Don't we love music stands, Harvey?
I can't get enough.
I can't love them. Right. When are they going to make clear ones? I don't know. But again, usually I gotta be honest too. There's a dance process to it too. Like I'm hearing this music, and there's part of me that like wants to react to it just from the start. And that's part of the performance, I think. I'm on Thursday. I'm painting to Irish singers, and I have no idea what it's gonna be like. It's gonna be fun. The Rialto in Joliet.
Nice.
Again,
Get
fun.
Michael Flatley in.
Something like that, yeah. There's somebody named Gavin, and there's a girl, her name is like Aofi
Of course.
Collins or something,
Probably pronounced Gertrude.
Yeah, right. Spelled with a Z and a.
Yeah, Arthur Wright dances around a lot. You ever watch Arthur dance?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
really, yeah.
Right,
He
and
really
sometimes
moves.
that's what makes it happen. Like if you start doing that thing and your body just wants to do a thing, you have to sort of give the people what they want in that sense too. It's like, come on, monkey, dance a little bit. So I'm okay with doing that because it's like, okay, it's part of the fun. One of the security things though is like I'm not doing it like facing you all. I tried that a few times where I was doing plexiglass. I was kind of looking at the audience and the band at the same time. And it was a little like, oh, this is how the performers feel. They got all these eyes on you. It's like, no, I kind of rather just do this. It's a little more, I'm I'm doing this fun time and I'm in my own zone, I'm reacting to music, and I turn around like, oh, there's 5 or there's 500 people here. It didn't matter. I don't know, I'll sort of keep going with this just because I have it going.
In a situation like this, do you come with like extra brushes, extra parts, pieces? How do you recommend for people to manage color mixing or?
I mean, I try to, it's just like, you hear musicians talk about like, did you bring all your tools, all your toys? And if you don't bring all your toys, then that's the one you need, right? So, yeah, but I also just use what I have.
Okay.
Another thing that's fun about that, and this all goes with improvisation and using what you have, odd objects. I mean, it's a paintbrush, but this was like a brush that washed up on the Jersey Shore. And I love it. I'll probably fix it one of these days. But there's something about this that I know that it was floating around in the ocean for a while. So every once in a while when I use this thing, I'm like, oh, hey, buddy, you know. I'm into objects like that. So, and these are used drumsticks. So sometimes it's fun, if the painting warrants it, to sort of do that thing. I learned from a guy named, or I would say that, there was a guy doing this before me when I learned that this actually thing. His name is Jeff Schlanger. He goes by the Music Witness, works out in New York City. He's been doing this since the late 50s, definitely 60s. He does a lot of the Vision Fest. He does all the Vision Fests in New York City. And so that's how I found out that there was actually a job. I didn't do it in New York because he was the guy doing it. Why would I do that? But before I did it here, I called up Jeff and was like, hey, Jeff, somebody wants me to do this in Chicago. How do you feel about that? He's like, man, I haven't been to Chicago since like the 80s. Go. So it really was like a permission thing. On that light too, talking about permission, sort of going on a tangent here. I always seek to get permission from the musicians, the venue, the management. I never just show up and do my thing, or else it would be my thing. I kind of feel like that would be disrespectful. I get myself invited to things, or I get invited on things, because it really is having a little bit of reverence for what's going on. And I don't want to be a distraction either, unless my job is to be a distraction. But that's why we're doing a jazz occurrence, because then it's okay to have paints and stuff next to the band. But it's always been important to me to sort of like say, just make sure I cool. It's also an excuse to network, which means, hey, I'll be at City Winery at this time. I'd like to sketch you. How does that work with you? And then oftentimes the person will respond, oh, that sounds great. I'd love to do that. What's your name? So like then I've sort of pre-met this person. They've given me the blessing. I'm like, okay, cool. I just got permission from this person. And it's a relationship thing. So I've got a good relationship with like City Winery and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily have to find out who this agent is. I can just say to City Winery, yeah, I'd like to sketch this person. And they will go, okay, we will ask their people and get back to you, your people, see if it works out. That's important. But I don't know, it's fun to sort of shake it up, and oftentimes if it's a percussion thing, then it's kind of fun. I'm not going to do it too much because I'm wearing a suit, and I would like to use this for Thursday. But, I mean, that's And for me, it's very much trying to get, this is being not a musician, trying to get in between the beat, like, try to be the musician that they don't have playing. Like get in between the bass line, or like to follow the bass line somehow. I mean, this is all, again, imagination nonsense that it might not mean anything, but it does for me in my process, And so it's okay to be looking sort of silly doing it, because I don't know. I see oftentimes I'm working back here and the band is working up front here. And I'm into this sort of like, I'm into the silly mode, and I'm sort of doing stuff and grooving. And they're playing, they're like, look at this guy back there, man. He's back there dancing to what we're doing. And I guess they appreciate that a little bit. It also kind of does it, like, let me see what you did. Because I saw that you were really, grooving. I am right-handed, but it's nice to sort of use both. I think that's interesting sometimes. That's sort of like a Jeff Schlanger thing. He works on paper with inks. He works sort of like slightly like this sort of level. And he'll do, like, have us two things. So again, like, I'm straight up stealing from that guy. On April 1st, when some of you are live painting, I'm gonna be working, but I'm also gonna be looking to see what you're doing. Like, what are you doing? Look, how can I cull, how can I make my stuff a little bit better by seeing, like, what you are doing? And I think that's okay.
You ever having a moment, Lou, where something you did influenced the musicians?
Yeah.
I had one here with a fellow trombone player. This is probably, I don't think we'd opened up to live shows yet. Because I started painting live to nobody. It was still lockdown.
Right.
But Matthew Davis and I played a lot of gigs together, fellow trombone player.
Yeah.
And he was doing some very traditional African instruments kind of thing, very spiritual stuff. And I had some sandpaper like crap I'd spread on the canvas and wasn't very happy with it. I was actually physically scraping it off with a giant scraper. So it was going, and I didn't realize how loud it was.
But you were
and
doing
then all of a sudden I hear him interjecting with the percussion sounds I'm making.
Right.
And there was this moment of awkwardness, like, oh shit, he can hear what I just did. And then I did it again, and then he did it again, and man, we have a laugh about that afterwards.
And when it's set up like that, that's kind of fun. I was doing a gig with Dave Miller, the guitarist, not too long ago, and it was just him and I, and we worked together before, so he knew that was kind of part of it. I could just do my thing and you do your thing over there, but since it's sort of like it was my gig, it was like I'm gonna do a Lou thing. Let's get as weird and as free as we can do, And so that's how it started off. It was like,
yeah. And if they're in tune with what you're doing, they'll hear it.
and then I could hear him like, and as a musician, you gotta listen to when it's your time to not be doing that. I mean, when I first started out, just showed up to a gig and sketching, and I kind of knew I was there. When there's a bass solo, that's not the time where I'm gonna be like, because then it'd be like that would be disruptive, right?
They have to wait for the trombone solo.
Yeah, you gotta wait for the screaming, gutsy sax thing happening. The story I was thinking about was the drummer Avriel Ra. If you all know that guy. Avriel's been around for a while. Played with Sun Ra, amongst other great stuff. And we had started to do some things together, and he said, one of the things that sort of hits me was like, we're doing a gig together, and then it's just a reveal at the end of what you did, because, I can't see what you're doing over there. He said, I would love it if I could see what you're doing in real time. And I was like, okay, how do we make that happen? And set up a gig at Constellation where I worked on a digital iPad on a big screen. And that's what he was looking at. Like, the band was sort of on the sides, the screen was here. So as the band was doing their thing, I was reacting, but it wasn't just this little canvas. I mean, it was this little iPad, but it was projected large. I did that also at the Apple Store on Michigan with Extraordinary Popular Delusions. We had like Jim Baker and Mars Williams. And, I'm just working small like this, but it's big on like the big wall. And they could see what was happening. Now, whether it directly influenced how they were playing, I'm not sure, but for Avriel, he was like, yeah, man, that felt like, and we've had conversations where it's like, you start talking all this weird abstract stuff and life, and like, I don't even know what we just talked about, but it felt like it was good. I did the thing with Robert Irving III, if you guys know who that is, the piano player, played with Miles Davis. And we just had this like 15-minute conversation about like everything. And it was surrounded by my artwork, and he was talking about being in the room when Miles Davis was painting and stuff like that. And so like afterwards we looked at each other like, all right, I don't know what we just were talking about, but this means we should do something else. Like this means you sort of connect on and that's the, for me, that's the best thing, and it's just to sort of connect on a abstract, I guess that's a spiritual level, or it's a non-verbal level. That's fun. And that's like, that's when I feel like I'm learning something, or I'm evolving as a human being, as an artist. And that's why I hope like our April 1st, that's why I have hopes for stuff like that, is that people will sort of either get bit by it, or they'll like make that one ladder long step in their process of like, oh, this only happened because I got myself out there and I did it, and I was listening, and I was watching what was going on here, and I don't know. Again, that's all. It's just only talk until you get to a piece. Another thing that's important, and I say this especially when I'm working with kids, is that this is not about making a pretty picture. This is about making something that's real, and sometimes the reality is not all that nice, you know what I mean? Like, if the gig is like something really grindy and nasty and someone's doing that, and I'm like, this is blood and guts, and this is dark, and this is black, and the painting's like, dude, it's time to get out the black. It's like, no, usually I don't get the black until the second layer. It's like, no, it's time to get it out, and that corner of the painting is black or something like that, or it's, sort of deep purple or something like that. That's just the way it is. That's important, I think, to sort of not, again, that's about not having preconceived notions of what it should be, and just letting it be, because then it's almost like I feel like sometimes like I'm a puppet in that sense. Like I'm just sort of like, I just get to be here, being the guy doing this, and then there's a freedom to that, because it's like, all right, this painting already exists. I just have to shut up, listen, get out of my own way. And I've talked to musicians. I think Tal Dean, Ziad was talking about that one time. It was just like how do you do that when you're up there? It's just like, it's a lot about getting out of your own way, which means whatever you have going on in here, you're not there. So like, just you're there for the purpose of the music. You're there for the purpose of I wouldn't say entertaining, but you're there to make something happen in the room, and being conscious of that. That's important. That's really bad. Sort of tapping into the cultural basis for why this music is so strong in Chicago.
Can I share a 60-second story?
Yeah, go.
So, if you don't know, I'm a musician too, and I had two musical lives. One was a theater performer, the other was a jazz musician. And in theater performing, you're playing the same thing over and over and over. You know what you're going to do. You're paid to do it a certain way. You're there because you're real good at it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no creativity involved whatsoever. So when Chris asked me to do my first live painting here, I kid you not, I prepared for it as if I was playing a book of Mormon. I practiced the same fucking painting. Sorry.
You did, really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nice.
I did the same exact painting 5 times in all. And I had the thing so timed that when I did it live with the trio, I was literally signing my name at the bottom as this last symbol was done.
Nice.
Like I had timed this thing down to a minute and 15 seconds perfectly.
Well, that's
you
a
know
gig
what?
too. Yeah.
The painting was terrible. It was so easily the worst version. Not even close. The first one was okay. The second was pretty good, and then it was a downhill slide from there. And I say this to Harvey and Jose all the time. Like, all right, what am I going to paint this with? And they always look at me like, yeah, whatever. Sure. But he calls it. He just.
I'm getting a bad rap the
You
entire night.
gotta
First
certain.
from this guy that says I do snapshots, and now from you, just dismissing your art.
No, you don't.
I'm leaving.
Oh, right. But it's once you you have a certain language and a certain vocabulary, and it's about just not being all that concerned with what you end up with. It might be terrible. It probably isn't going to.
You have to, yeah, I think you have to allow yourself, like,
Right, yeah.
this, I could fall flat on my face, but that's part of the excitement, I think. And I think that's what musicians go through too. Like, you know, we've played this a lot, we're good together, but there's a chance one of us is just gonna completely fart, and we're all gonna be like, oh, like, you know,
That was a burrito.
come on, what was this, you know? But, you know,
Nobody ever points and laughs. It's never, no one's ever pointed and laughed. Look at that terrible thing. They can't believe that you're doing what you're doing. They literally can't even fathom that you have the chutzpah to get up and do that.
yeah,
It blows their minds every time.
The process that you were talking about of practicing the painting over and over and over, that's a live painting category too. And when I started doing this, people were like, "Oh, you're a live painter," like when you do like Jimi Hendrix, or like when you're painting the CEO of the company, and you sort of do the whole thing, and then you turn it over like, "It's this guy," and everybody's like, "That's amazing. How did you do that?" And of course, that girl was like, "Because I practice this over and over and over." And I've seen that. I mean, that's also entertaining. Is that someone when they take a brush, like, what am I going to do now? They do that one move, they do this whole thing, and turn it over, and it's Jimi Hendrix, you know. That's because that's their performance, you know. And I have no problem with that. That's like, it's a gig, you got your gig. But I like to think that like this kind of stuff and the stuff that we do with the live painting, especially with the Jazz Record Art Collective, is really, really improvisational stuff. Like you said, it's skydiving. I don't do that anymore. I never done that. I don't even hike that much because my knee creaks now. Crack. So there's a lot of things I'm not going to do anymore. But this is my version of adventure. This is my jumping out of an airplane. This is like the fun thing. And the more fun I'm having, well, I guess that's personally that's the most fun. And then, you know, not caring what it turns out to be like, there's a liberation to that as an artist, because we're so trained to do like, you know, even like, you gotta frame this picture, like, or if Harvey, if you're working, it's like, you know, you may take 50 shots, and you're only gonna make money on one of them, and so make sure it's a good one, you know. It's like the pressure of, you do have to, because also for me, it's like, this is the bread and butter, man. And, okay, cool, that's good enough. So I will jump really quick to some of the fun stuff. And I'll do that just because I can. Another good thing about the tarps is I can do this, which adds to the, you know, making sure that there's not something behind that I'm doing. There's controlled flicking. I also sometimes will put this on the floor and straight up, you know, do the Jackson
Really
Pollock
swack
stuff.
it, yeah.
Or if I can spread the tarp out, and I've done it here, where like not only myself, the band is underneath the tarp, so that I can really just, and they know it's gonna happen. You know, at a certain point, I'm gonna be like right in front of them, like doing this, and that happening when there's like a sax solo or something like that. That's fun, you know. And it's like also the band is like, okay, that's not something you get every day. But I'll jump to the figurative stuff, which sometimes. Again, I'm oftentimes dipping into the glaze to keep it wet. And I'm not looking at anything. I'm pretty sure this is Miles Davis, but. Lyrical brushstrokes is another term I like a lot. I mean, I would have loved to have been able to do this kind of stuff with like Louis Armstrong when he was young and doing this stuff, and because, you know, like our documents of that, Louis Armstrong specifically are, you know, scratchy films, scratchy records, almost to the point where like, I'm not sure if I would like that. But I'm sure if you were there and you hadn't heard a lot of that before, you were like, what is this? This is like, is this changing everything? And so it's the element of that plus Toulouse-Lautrec, painting prostitutes in the cafe, painting the piano player. For some reason, this is looking more like an octopus than somebody playing something. But the fun part about the repeated sketching of people is I tend to sort of get to know their head, which means I'm comfortable with what they look like. But then I also love new collaborations, like this one here was a new collaboration. I picked them because I have no idea what it's going to be like. And of course, folks, there's always the tenets of good composition, what works, what doesn't work. Having white space, all the sort of art school fun stuff, it's all there. And like I said, like I'm getting a black paintbrush out now. This could completely destroy this, right? If I just started making movements, it could just really mess it up. And that's okay, that's like the danger zone. There's water dripping down my hand. And there's also like Japanese sumi painting in here, which is like, how do you communicate with only a few brush strokes? And, have a dynamism that, having a brush that does a lot of different stuff. Is dynamism?
Yeah.
Put a Keith Haring in there. And I would say the gayest is you're trying to say, like, this is what it was like to be alive. What is it, March 13th? What's today? March. Whatever today is, like, this is what it was like to be in this room. Last thing I want to say is, just decide if you all know what graphic scores are. Composers and stuff, what they will do, instead of like notes on a page, it's like a painting. It's called a graphic score. So it's like, oh, certain colors mean certain things. There's a lot of room for improvisation in there. I've seen those things. I'm liberated by not being a musician, but sometimes I'm making marks, syncopated marks, as I kind of said, like, what would be like that for the fact, instead of a musician, like, can you play that? Like, can you use your imagination a little bit and make it up a little bit? Like, if I had to, it would sound like this, Have people do that. Any last questions before I get out of here?
So cool. This is incredible.
Yeah, it's cool. And
Thank you so much.
Concepts about trying to connect with what the musicians do. So, am I having lived that on that side of the stage now?
Yeah.
You've got a little different perspective on it, because I know what they're trying to do.
Right.
And it wasn't until I let go and realized that I'm doing the same thing.
Right.
I'm doing, this is exactly what they're doing. I just
Right,
have a different
yeah.
mission in mind.
And for me, it's also like being a fan, Like,
Yeah, what I discovered is I was making marks and making images and things that I just would not make anywhere else. And that's when I realized I figured I got it.
yeah.
That's what.
Or you broke free of something.
Broke free of
Yeah.
the preconceptions. It's like the difference between being a jazz player and being a theater player.
Right.
Now you get to play and express and be and react instead of this is how this is supposed to go. This is what you need to do. There really aren't any rules. And I've tried to go back and reproduce paintings that I did live.
How
Because,
often do
oh,
you get
that worked. I should be able to do that again. It never does.
And how often do you
Never.
get to work in a zone where there aren't any rules? There's you can't really do anything wrong. I mean, you could just make it so you just paint over it. But
Lou, I think the most impressive thing is that you did all this in a black suit. You didn't want to get any paint on. That's the most impressive.
my dry cleaner waiting, she's like, I try to get this to paint out. It's like, you don't have to.
I have
This is what paint's for.
ruined so many pairs of pants. I have to wear the same one.
You see the shoe, my church shoes now and stuff.
I should.
Yeah, I would say cull from this whatever you want. Take some of it, ignore it,
Love it.
do the opposite. I'm a big on the polarization too of influence. Like I was saying, sometimes when the painting's like, hey, let's do this. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a rebellious teenager. I want to live in my house. I'm gonna do the opposite of that. How do you like that painting? You know, the painting's like, okay, you're gonna do that? You know, there's a little bit of that fun. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question though?
Sure.
Do you ever revisit a piece? Or is it whatever was in that moment when the last note is played, it's done?
I try to do that.
That's cool.
I try to make it like, that's what it was. Let's mess with it. Unless the painting really wants to be something else. You know, and that's sometimes when I haven't seen it in a while, and the painting's like, you haven't finished my dialogue, man. You need to put like a black square over here. But oftentimes that's like, I'll tape off a thing, or I'll do like a spray paint thing, something I can't do
In front of others.
in front of the whole thing, you know, or take it outside and do like a flat thing. I have done that.
How do you price them? That was a note from a couple members who had to step out. How do you price a live piece?
I've been selling this size for $500 cash for like 10 years.
Okay.
That's my takeaway. If it's going to be, you know, I work with a couple agencies. For them, they take half, so then it's a $1,000 piece.
Okay.
I should probably price it up. If it's something I don't want to sell, then I price it up too.
Okay.
If it's something really unique, I'm like, I kind of want to hold on to this. They're like, oh yeah, that's a $1,000 piece. And sometimes when I do that, they're like, okay, here's $1,000.
I think in this case, I think I saw the one $500 next door
Yeah.
online, but I think right here in the room, I think.
Okay.
Like a
Yeah.
single piece?
Yeah, on one.
Well, I work on watercolor paper, like 8 at the same time. So they kept them pretty cheap, so that's why I was curious about
Sure.
how you price them.
And I've never done, you know, these like the small ones they do, like 11 by 14.
Yeah.
I usually sell those for like $3. Those are like the dry stuff. And I've never done a fair. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you.
Good night.
I've
Be safe.
never done an art fair before, but I did one last summer with my own because
Yeah.
this woman was like, this year you're not live painting, you're selling your artwork. So set the tent and had these bins like records. And I made like $3 grand that day. Just people just coming through and looking at them like, what's this, you know?
I'm picking it up.
And it was like, okay.
Maybe I will do one of those things.
Cheap presentations.
Yeah.
You, sir. Excel. Thank you.
Musicians want one unusual